Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am in a new studio space. I felt like it was time to kind of up Herstory a bit, kind of up the look of it, revitalize the look a little bit. I like it a lot. It's not as busy as it was. Tell me if you like this new space, please. I would love to know if you like this new space. But also it's very, very simple because Christmas is coming up and it's just gonna explode back here. So I'm keeping it simple. New studio space. Sorry if the lighting's weird. I'm still figuring it all out, but I like it so far. Tell me how you like it so far. I enjoy it very much. Anyway, so I found out like 3 days ago that November is Native American Heritage Month. I don't know how I feel about that. I'm a little bit upset that I didn't know about this because this is me. But yeah, I didn't know Native American Heritage Month in November. This month celebrates Native Americans and Alaskan Natives, also called Indigenous people. And pretty awesome that I technically did my first story of this month was part Native American Bessie Coleman. I was already doing it and I didn't even know I was doing it. The history gods, gals were looking down on me saying, hey, do this, and then you'll find that out. I'm just going with the flow. Now that I know it's Native American Heritage Month, let's spend the rest of this month talking about this astounding culture. Now, disclaimer, I'm not going to do Sacagawea because research. I will do her at some point. Just not right now. However, our next Native American woman we are going to be talking about today is, to put it simply, a badass warrior, Lozen. Let's get started. Okay, first things first, of course, as always, we are talking about Native Americans. I will do my best to pronounce these names correctly. Correct me kindly in the comments if I do it wrong. I will do my best. Here we go. Where is she from? Lozen was born around 1840 near Ojo Caliente, which translates to Hot Eye in present-day New Mexico. She was born into the Chihen Apache band, and at the time, there were at least 7 Apache bands, and many clans all over what was known as Apacheera, which is now northern Mexico, eastern Arizona, and southwestern New Mexico. Before we move on, bands are different from tribes. Tribes are large groups of people. They have chiefs and some share a single language, belief system, and agricultural system, etc. While bands are small, usually made up of 10 to 50 people, nomadic groups that are made up of a few families and are based on kingship. They move from place to find food, are politically independent, and most importantly, are egalitarian societies. This means that everyone of the same age and gender are equal. Lastly, tribes start out as separate bands that then come together to make a tribe and become politically integrated. Lozen's band, the Chihen, were also known as the Eastern Chiricahua or Red Paint People because of the red band of clay they wore across their faces during ceremonies, and they were known for raiding. Apache bands were often at war with one another, and because of that, many of the people were trained in combat. Her band was specifically named the Warm Springs Apache, which was led by her father, and her mother was a well-respected woman in the band. Whenever I say band, I had to remind myself, band, Native Americans, not boy band. Growing up as a child, she showed very little interest in the traditional role of women and spent most of her time with her brother, Victorio. Like all natives, Lozen was taught to ride horses. She first learned to ride when she was 7, and she quickly became a very talented rider. She was so good that even though she was young, she was one of the best riders in her band and could soon outrun any of the men in her band. Her brother, being an awesome big brother, taught her how to use a bow, spear, club, and rifle. Now, I've always found the Native American culture absolutely fascinating, and their gender roles are what you would expect. However, it's very different than what we might think when we think of traditional gender roles. The Apache had very strict gender roles. Men fought and women were the homemakers. However, say their band is being attacked by enemies. I mean, we can all relate to that. The women were responsible for getting the important things and getting to safety. Because of that, the women obviously needed to be in excellent physical shape. So, because of that, starting at the age of 8, Apache girls began intense as hell physical training. This included waking up at the crack of nothing dawn and running to the top of a mountain that was nearby. And they would do that a couple times. Can you imagine 8-year-olds today doing that? No. It was clear to her parents from a young age that Lozen was not going to be a traditional female in the band. Sure, she learned the traditional women's stuff like cooking, basket weaving, sewing, gathering food, caring for children, but in reality, she hated that stuff. She liked hanging out with her brother. I mean, he's teaching her how to use a club and a gun, for freak's sake. You would want to do that too if the alternate was learning to sew. Plus, he would let Lozen participate in hunting and playing rough games with her brother and the other boys in the band. Her skills with a sling and a bow and arrow were extraordinary. Clearly, like her father and his father, she was just going to be a warrior. Let's take a minute and let me explain the world around Lozen at this time. Okay? Like I said, Lozen's homeland stretched from New Mexico, Arizona, and northern Mexico. And unsurprisingly, these lands were rich with gold. The Mexicans were the first to invade and try to take the gold. They came by the hundreds, and as they made their way into the territory and searching for the gold, along the way, they made slaves of the Cheyenne and Apache people. The native leaders were quickly seeing that these men were not good and quickly began forming raid parties in an effort to take back their land and free their fellow natives from slavery. Among these leaders was Mangas Coloradas, chief of the Membrendo Chiricahuas, which were based in the southern plains, Cochise, who was a Chiricahua Apache chief, and, I promise you're not ready for this because I wasn't, Geronimo. And I don't want to hear no one say, "Who's that?" No one is allowed to say they don't know who the flip Geronimo is. And not right now in the timeline, but later Lozen's brother Victorio. By 1848, New Mexico had become a U.S. territory under the Treaty of Hidalgo. And around this time, the California gold rush started and people going to California went through the Apache lands. Now moving forward, you need to realize 2 things. 1, the Indian Removal Act was signed into law by President Andrew Jackson, and this led to the horrificness of the Trail of Tears. And 2, because of those things happening in the East, everyone's coming west, and through the process, their lands, their sacred, ancestral, generational lands are being stripped from them for no good reason except for the excuse of manifest destiny, which is America's God-given right to move west and just take things. Plus, their lands are getting invaded from the south, from Mexico. So naturally, all these things are making things really intense and scary. So with this atmosphere in mind, back to Lozen. With this environment around her, Lozen unfortunately saw a lot of destruction. When she was a child, she saw an ambush of her people by a group of Mexican soldiers. Apparently, the men lured her brother, and the band with promises of gifts. And when they arrived, the Mexicans just open fired. Luckily, Lozen and Victorio were able to escape alive, but many of their fellow band men, women, and children died. And Lozen would naturally never forget this. As with many cultures, her band had a coming-of-age ceremony when she turned 12. They do this ceremony because that's normally when a girl's first menstrual cycle is, and it is a celebration of the girl entering womanhood. I would love to pop some bottles when I had my first period. That would have made the scariness of it a lot more better to handle. This ritual would take place on a sacred mountain, and according to oral history, it is on this mountain that Lozen received a spiritual calling and was given the gift supposedly by the god Lozen, who is the supreme god of the Chiricahua Apache people and is thought to be the creator of the universe, all life, and who governed all, of excellent tracking abilities, from animals to enemies. And this was her sign that she was destined to become a warrior. According to Harlan Geronimo, great-grandson of Geronimo, Lozen would lift her palms up and walk in a circle until her palms got warm and the veins in her arms turned dark blue. This would indicate to her the direction of the animal or enemy would approach. The intensity of the heat of her palms would gauge the distance of the enemy. She also gained the very unique ability to understand horses. I don't know exactly how. Maybe her father died at some point. I couldn't find out, or when this happened, but Lozen's brother Victorio became the new leader of their band, and he knew his sister was honestly better than the men of the band. So she joined the men on raids, and she quickly got respect from the male warriors, and she became Victorio's very trusted partner. So because of her talents, and since she's just awesome, a lot of the men were courting her for marriage, but she let it be known very clearly that she was not interested in men, and this would never change. She would never marry and never have children. She might have not wanted to be a wife or mother, but she still did more female-dominant tasks. She studied medicine and became a well-renowned medicine woman with extensive knowledge of medicinal properties of minerals and plants. By the time she was 20, she had become an expert at stealing horses, and this earned her the name of Lozen, which means dexterous horse thief or one who has stolen horses. By the time the Mexican-American War ended in 1848, the Southwest lands became part of the United States. And with this integration, more white people began settling into the area, and the government wanted more land for those white citizens. With these settlers moving onto these native lands, unfortunately, a lot of death was brought upon these settlers from natives, and this happened constantly. So, wanting to give these settlers protection, sent soldiers to build posts along the Santa Fe Trail. And as you can probably guess, this just kind of made things worse. So, Rutherford B. Hayes and now President Ulysses S. Grant sent representatives to many native nations to negotiate peace and prevent more war. Victorio and Lozen went to many of these meetings. However, rightly so, they, along with basically all the other natives, were squinting. They were like, at these promises the white man was making. You all know where this is going. And taking the wise word from Pocahontas's dad,
these white men are dangerous.
World history in one sentence. As history shows, the American government broke basically all the promises, agreements, and treaties they made with the natives, including the Apaches. So the U.S. military would go to these tribes and bands, Lozen's included, and just said, leave or be killed. Of course, not wanting to die, these tribes and bands packed their livelihoods and were forced onto reservations. In 1862, Lozen fought at Apache Pass along with 200 warriors to fight for their land. It was a valiant fight, but they were pushed to retreat. After that fight, she was welcomed into council as a warrior, and from this point on, she fought for years alongside her brother in the struggle to keep their homeland. I'm getting mad. Lozen is thought to have been involved in a horse raid at Fort Craig, where they fought with bows and arrows and took horses from soldiers. In 1869, tired of the fighting, Lozen, Victorio, and other Apache leaders agreed with the U.S. government to move to a reservation at Ojo Caliente, and they did just that in 1870. But true to the brand, America took back that agreement. And the band was forced onto the harsher conditions of the Warm Springs Apache Reservation in San Carlos, Arizona in 1875. So to put this into perspective for you, they have gone from their beautiful, plentiful lands west of New Mexico's Black Mountain to the harsh, dry lands of San Carlos, Arizona. On the way to this reservation, the journey was extremely hard and the conditions were terrible. The members struggled with hunger and disease, and since the government knew nothing of how Native American customs worked, a lot of different Apache groups were forced to live together, and because of that, tensions were very high. It also doesn't help that this place just sucked. I mean, compared to where their homeland was, it was hot as hell and the land wouldn't grow crops, so they had to depend on the government for food and supplies, and guess how well that worked out. It's worse than you think. There were, of course, corrupt government agents that stole thorns that were meant for the natives to purchase food. I'm hot, I'm hungry, and you're stealing my money for me to get food? Yeah, I'm gonna be a bit pissed. Understandably, by 1877, Lozen and other Chieftain members were sick of this place and wanted their land back, as they freaking should. So Lozen joined her brother on September 2nd, 1877 in leading 300 warriors, women and children back to Ojo Caliente, New Mexico. Along the way, they raided camps, and this led to the so-called Victorio's War starting in 1879, but ended 2 years later in 1881 when rumors that Victorio was arrested by the government spread. The rest of the band fled to the mountains, and there, wars between them and a small group of U.S. soldiers broke out. Lozen was part of this group and quickly became its leader, basically. She inspired the women and children frozen in fear of crossing the raging waters of the Rio Grande when fleeing from U.S. soldiers. James Kowekla, I hope I said that right, a member of the band and a child at this time, recounts Lozen's bravery. Quote, I saw a magnificent woman on a beautiful horse. Lozen, sister of Victorio. Lozen, the woman warrior. High above her head, she held her rifle. There was a glitter as her right foot lifted and struck the shoulder of her horse. He reared, then plunged into the torrent. She turned his head upstream and he began swimming. End quote. This bravery got the other women and children to immediately follow her, and they got to the other end of the Rio Grande. They were cold and wet, sure, but they were alive. To make her even more badass, here's an amazing story. Grab some popcorn. This is amazing. Just listen. Oh, shoot, dude. In 1880, the band was moving through Texas on their way to Mexico when a pregnant woman went into labor. Now, I don't have kids, but I've heard enough stories and seen enough movies and TV shows to know that that already sucks. But it's made worse because American soldiers were on their tail. I'm in labor, I'm in the desert, I'm hot, and there's enemies coming around. Oh no. Lozen left the group to help this woman give birth, and since birth can take a few minutes, by the time the baby boy was born, they're now in the middle of a Mexican desert with a newborn baby separated from the others. Not good. Plus, the women and this new kid, which talk about a stressful time to be born, I'm just saying, have a rifle, knife, a cartridge belt, which is something that holds bullets, and 3 days worth of food. And they're in the middle of the desert with a newborn baby. I don't know about you, but I think I would just start to cry. After almost getting discovered, and that's a story in and of itself, they packed the baby up and continued their journey through the desert that's crawling with Mexican and U.S. cavalry forces. Stress. At some point, their food supply was running low, so they kind of need a restock. Get this. This chick, not wanting to make their presence known with a gunshot, some freaking how tracked down a longhorn. You know those cows with horns that from tip to tip could reach more than 8 freaking feet long? Yeah, those things. Got her knife out and killed it. Okay, butchered it for meat and went on their way. At some point, they came across a Mexican camp, so Lozen, being the horse whisperer she is, stole 2 horses of theirs, which obviously helped greatly with their journey. And she stole some dude's shirt. I would assume that it's to wrap the baby in for a lot of reasons. Eventually, they were able to reunite with the group at the Mescalero Reservation. I couldn't do it. Look, between the Indians and pioneers, womanhood, couldn't do it. Could not do it. I'm sure we all like to think that we could, but be for real here. You know you couldn't do it. This is great, of course, but it is upon her arrival that she learned that her brother Victorio, along with the other Apaches, were actually ambushed by Mexican troops and had killed around 80 members, including women and children. Her brother was included among the dead. He was 55 when he was killed. This battle was called the Battle of Tres Castillos, and only 3 of the 260 Mexicans were killed, and 68 women and children were captured. To make this worse, some truly believe that if Lozen was with her brother, they would have not been ambushed. And Lozen was convinced of this completely in her own right. Completely distraught, Lozen left the group and met up with the survivors of her band. At some point, Lozen and her warriors joined forces with the badass prominent Apache war chief, Geronimo. He's back twice. In 1882, Lozen joined him in a raid that freed 600 people from the San Carlos Reservation, and she rode with him again in 1885 during his final escape from the reservation. Okay, this part is a little confusing. I have tried to make as much sense of it as I can. Just listen. Lozen continued to ride alongside Geronimo. Dream girl. He started to rely heavily on Lozen, mostly because of her powers in locating the enemy. And for a while, the natives were fairly happy being in the Chiricahua Mountains, evading capture from Mexican and American soldiers. However, over time, the US and American troops were able to track them down and capture warriors, until only 36 of the 140 members were left, Geronimo and Lozen included. By August of 1886, the Chiricahua tribe was backed into a corner. Their numbers were low, their food was running out, and supplies were non-existent. With Lozen's persuasion, Geronimo agreed to sit down to negotiate with General Nelson A. Miles. And after a lot of back and forth, Geronimo reluctantly agreed to lay down arms. While Geronimo was doing that, Lozen and another female warrior, Dadaste, began peace talks of their own. However, once again, true to the brand, the Americans didn't take these negotiations and peace talks seriously. And 5 days after Geronimo agreed to lay down arms, the rest of the Chiricahua warriors, Geronimo, Dadaste, and Lozen, were forced onto a train that was bound for the swampy lands of Florida to a prison camp. And that's Geronimo. And that's Lozen. This would be Geronimo's final surrender. Later, Lozen was officially taken as a prisoner of war by the American military and taken to the Mount Vernon barracks in Alabama. And like many prisoner of war camps, the conditions were awful and diseases like TB, pneumonia, malaria, and meningitis were rampant. I can very much guarantee you that Lozen kept her hopes of seeing her land again very high, but unfortunately, she would never see her homeland again. Lozen died on June 17, 1889 of tuberculosis in confinement at the Mount Vernon barracks. She was 50 years old. Luckily, some of her relatives and band members were able to escape and make it back west. Lozen is buried in an unmarked grave in Alabama. Her story has been told in many books, and though she's not as widely known and or celebrated as Pocahontas, Geronimo, or Sacagawea, the brave tales of Lozen continue to be told to young Apache children to this day. And she continues to be a legend and celebrity that's celebrated in Lozen's community she fought so hard for. There you go. Kind of first official story of Native American Heritage Month. Did you kind of know about her? I personally didn't really know about her. I have a very hard time talking about Native Americans, not because their language is hard to say, not because their stories are difficult to follow, but because it makes me so infuriated what these people went through. I know a lot about Native American history and how that whole stuff started. I had to take a lot of deep breaths during this research. But tell me if you've ever heard of Lozen, or if maybe you've heard of her but you didn't really know about her. I just love how she and Geronimo's paths crossed. It's perspective on just how history does these fun things of bringing random people with random big-wigged celebrities, their paths just cross. And it's like, huh? It's awesome to me. And of course, first official story in the new space. I actually am kind of happy that Christmas is coming up, not for all the other reasons. I love Christmas, but also so that then I can fill this place up and I can work around it. My mom kind of helped me put this stuff together. But Mom, I am so sorry. Christmas, you can't tell me crap. I'm going to decorate how I want to. If you learned something today, and I really hope you did, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly comment. I will see you all in my next video. But until then, don't be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you next time, guys.
Coming at you like real, real wild. Here to light it up, set the world